They burned the pages. That's what Grandma used to say when the grown folks got quiet. Not just books, not just records, pages, names, pictures, whole pieces of people's lives. Sometimes she would lower her voice so the children could barely hear her. They don't always burn the paper with fire, she said. Sometimes they burn it with fear. I didn't understand that when I was young. I thought history was something protected in libraries, stored in buildings, locked away safely for the future. But in many black families, history survived another way. On porches, in kitchens, in church pews, in whispers. Because there were times people learned that speaking too loudly about certain things could bring trouble to your door. Some families survive by remembering everything. Others survive by pretending to forget. That's why Grandpa would stare out into the distance before telling certain stories about Mississippi. Stories about land, about men disappearing, about families leaving in the middle of the night carrying suitcases tied with rope. And every now and then, somebody would say the word they, not names, just they, because everybody already understood. Sometimes they meant the law. Sometimes it meant mobs. Sometimes it meant banks, schools, newspapers, or people who smiled in daylight and threatened you after dark. And after slavery ended, freedom still came with rules nobody wrote down publicly. Rules about where you could walk. Rules about where you could work. Rules about what happened if you became too successful. So people learned to protect history the only way they could. They carried it inside themselves. They passed it from grandmother to granddaughter, from porch to porch, from song to song, from prayer to prayer. That is why so many black families can tell you what happened, even when the records are missing. Because memory became survival, a mother warned her children which roads not to walk after dark. A grandfather taught a boy how to lower his eyes in certain towns, just to make it home alive. A grandmother might never say certain names out loud, but somehow the lessons still reach the next generation. And maybe that is the part history books struggle to explain, how silence became protection, how people learned to hide pain inside ordinary conversations, how families could sit together carrying stories too dangerous to fully speak. Some people left Mississippi carrying those stories north to Chicago, Detroit, Cleveland, and California. Others stayed behind, trying to survive in towns where freedom still felt controlled by fear. But whether they stayed or left, they carried the memory with them, not because remembering made them weak, because forgetting could make them vulnerable. That is what Commandment number 2 was really about. Tell the truth, pass it on, even when the pages disappear, even when photographs go missing, even when communities are pushed into silence. Because if the story survives, the people survive too. Maybe that is why certain stories still move through families like whispers carried on the wind. Not always written down, not always recorded, but remembered. A recipe passed from one kitchen to another, a warning spoken softly before a child walked outside, a look on an elder's face when somebody mentioned Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, or Louisiana. Sometimes the story was hidden inside gospel music, sometimes inside discipline, sometimes inside the way grandparents taught children to survive without ever fully explaining why. Because there were things many people believed children should not see too early. The fear, the humiliation, the danger of being out of place, But even in silence, the lesson survived. That is why memory mattered so much after slavery. Because once a people understand their story, they begin to understand themselves. And when a people lose their memory, others can rewrite who they were. Maybe that is why some families protected old photographs like treasure. Why some kept family Bibles hidden away. Why elders repeated the same stories over and over again until the children could recite them too. They understood something powerful. If the truth survives in the people, then the people can never fully disappear. And maybe somebody watching this right now remembers those warnings too. Maybe your grandparents spoke carefully about certain places, certain names, certain years. If they did, leave a comment and tell me. What stories survived in your family even when nobody wrote them down? Oh,